Hey, everybody out there with us once again. It's Mark Collingsworth, the CIO, that is Chief Investment Officer of their Global Wealth Management. And we're here to talk with Mark about Bidenomics. The president keeps touting that in many speeches in different places. Bidenomics, it's working. He keeps whispering to us. Mark, is there any indication that Bidenomics is working in any way?
Absolutely not. Give you a perfect example, the inflation rate. When Joe Biden came into office, inflation was somewhere around 1.3, 1.4%. It's now shot up to over 5%. When Joe Biden came into office, the price of gasoline has almost doubled. Now he's blamed it on the Ukraine. No, gas prices were already skyrocketing before the Ukraine thing. So now I really don't see a lot of evidence, and especially when you just talk to people, talk about going to the grocery store and they say, "Well, Mark, a few years ago, I bought this for $1. Now I'm having to pay $2 for it." It's just people aren't filling it in their pocketbooks. And saw a report that the average person now pays $708 more today for the exact same products that they paid under Donald Trump.
What about the argument they seem to have been making as they make these speeches that it takes time to work, but it is working? It's gradually coming along. It is working. Is it showing any signs of progress?
Well, not from my viewpoint, but you also got to remember, no politician is going to tell you the truth, first of all. So they're just going to get up there and tell you it's working, trying. I think a politician one time said, if you tell the lies long enough, people will start to believe it. And they're sitting here trying to tell people that Bidenomics is working when it's really not, trying to brainwash them. And there's some people that believe that's working. They don't see that they're spending more money at the gas pump. They just hear this propaganda that's tricking them into this, because right now the way it stands, if Joe Biden does not get reelected, odds are it's going to be Donald Trump. And the Democrats don't want Donald Trump in there because he's going to come into office looking for some payback.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of talk about that now. And many people think, well-deserved payback, considering what they're doing to him with all these lawsuits, and he's in court half the time now when he should be campaigning. And, the argument's being made more and more strongly, I think, with more and more credibility, that the justice system has been weaponized against Trump, and Trump says, against me, next is against you. So, that's sinking in too. But getting back to the economics and Bidenomics, um, the Fed recently made some announcements that could affect more of whether Bidenomics will work at all in time for the election.
Based on my models, it looks like we're probably going to have a recession starting probably in I'd say early spring to mid spring of next year. The Fed's probably going to cut interest rates on that, but normally the Fed doesn't cut interest rates till clearly a recession is well underway. That's just to get, the inflation levels down. Even if they do start cutting interest rates sometime in the spring, by the time those rates filter in, they will not have filtered into the economy in time to turn Bidenomics around.
All right, but the Fed's made some announcements concerning interest rates, didn't they, just recently?
They just had a meeting about 2 weeks ago where they said they're going to keep the rates higher for a longer time period on their dot plot, which is their forecast of what they estimate the interest rates will be at, forecasting one more rate increase this year and a possibility of two rate increases next year. And as right now, they're not planning on cutting interest rates next year. But if I had to guess, based on my models, you're going to have a recession in the spring of next year, which will prompt them to cut interest rates at some point after that.
Okay, so they induce a recession intentionally. That's the way they bring
Yep.
inflation down. But the recovery, you say, won't be in time for the presidential election in 2024.
Correct. Once the Fed starts cutting interest rates, it usually takes months and months for it to filter into the economy. Just like the Fed started raising interest rates back in um, February of last year, we're just now starting to really see the effects of those higher interest rates today. So when the Fed starts cutting rates next year, you won't see or feel the results of it until 2025, which will be well after the election.
And Mark, in terms of presidential strategy for the election, I keep scratching my head why they came up with Bidenomics as their main campaign slogan. I mean, did they really think that most people buy in to what they're claiming is a success with the economy.
Well, it's kind of a bad marketing ploy because now you're attaching the man's name to the actual economy,
Right.
which is going to work for, is going to work for the GOP when they're in there saying, the economy sucks and so does Biden. Bidenomics right there.
Yeah, I mean, every time somebody pays interest on their credit card, car loan, mortgage, they're going to be thinking Bidenomics. It's
Yeah,
working.
it's kind of the same thing now, like, Obamacare. Obamacare has been a disaster. So the word Obamacare has a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. You can keep your doctor, you won't see your insurance go up, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, in fact, I remember Obama saying when they were nicknaming it Obamacare, he says, that's something that I welcome, and my name being attached to it. I don't know if he feels the same way today. Let's talk about the effects so far of these continuing interest rate hikes. What's more expensive? What's more difficult for people to cope with economically in keeping their households together?
Say the biggest thing is probably, gasoline prices, because, not only does the consumer have to fill up their own gas tank to go to work and so forth, when you go and buy food, those trucks have to use gasoline to transport food to the store. So those higher gasoline prices are passed on to higher food prices. When the farmers grow those crops, they're having to use gasoline. So they have to pass those gasoline costs on to the food prices. So and everybody eats food. That's the funny thing. I love it when they do the CPI numbers, they back food and inflation out of it and say, well, look, inflation's really not going up if you back out food and energy. Well, last time I checked, I have to eat and I have to drive a car to work.
Biden has repeatedly accused the oil companies of profiteering, saying that the profits of the oil companies are at record highs. So why should they be gouging the average person with these high gasoline prices? In other words, he's saying it's not necessary to have such high gasoline prices. The oil companies are purposely engaging in price gouging.
Well, now this is the problem. So let's get back to, transportation costs. Everyone knows that Joe Biden will not allow oil companies to drill on U.S. federal lands, correct?
Yeah.
Right? Agreed. So if you cannot drill oil that's, just 50 or 60 miles away from you, that means you got to buy it from overseas. That means you got to pump it in another country, you got to put it on a tanker, you got to ship it, and all those costs, the pumping it over there, putting on the freighters and transporting it, that's passed on to the cost. So right there alone, that shoots a hole in it. It's the transportation. You know how much one of those freaking tankers cost to move oil from across the United States over here? It's a lot of money. Just I've seen a report. Just the cost to put oil on the tanker and moves the price of oil up $4 from the entire cross structure, just moving it on the ship from point A to point B.
Well, I've heard the argument that against what you're saying that the supply is there. There's no shortage of oil. So, considering the basic law of economics, supply and demand, since there's plenty of supply, why should prices be so high?
That is because there's a transportation cost in it. So even though you do have that ample supply, the demand side of it is so high on the transportation cost, it's driving up the prices. Now, let's not forget,
But
Joe
the
Biden is pumping the SPR. Oh, go
but,
ahead.
but the transportation cost reflects the high gasoline prices. And again, why are they high if there's plenty of supply? The more supply you have, the cheaper any commodity gets, correct? Usually.
Correct. But the problem is the supply is not here. It's only the oil's only cheap if you can pump it right here. Think about this. How much would it cost you right now to walk down to the street and buy a pack of bubble gum? Wouldn't really cost you that much because it's close. Now, if I told you you had to walk halfway around the world and buy a pack of bubble gum, how much is it going to cost you then?
So
First of all, transportation cost. It's going to cost you an airplane ticket. It's going to cost you some food. You're going to have to eat between, but it's going to take you at least a day to get there. So you're going to have to eat, drink, fly on an airplane. That's all going to be passed off in the price of that piece of candy.
So in other words, there is plenty of supply, but the supply itself is more expensive because it's coming from foreign sources largely.
It's correct. It's not here. The supply is only cheap if you buy it here. It's because you have to go around on the other side of the world to get it is where the supply problem is now a problem. We don't have a supply basically.
Okay, let's say all these foreign sources are pumping out a lot of oil, so there's plenty of supply, even though there it may be cost more to transport. If there's a lot of supply or an oversupply, would that not itself bring down the prices?
Well, actually not because foreign countries right now like OPEC are so excited that Joe Biden won't allow oil to be pumped on US lands, they're actually reducing their supply levels overseas to drive prices up even more. And that's why Joe Biden is tapping into the SPR to try to drive prices down. That in the long run is not going to help because the SPR was designed in case the United States goes to war, it has an emergency oil supply to tap. He's driven that thing down to where there's only a 30-day supply left. At some point, you have to buy oil back up, and you're going to drive oil through the roof, replenishing almost a 900 million barrels in the SPR.
What about the electric vehicle factor that they're pushing so hard?
That's kind of funny too. By like the with the UAW, the General Motors strikes and everything. Do these people not realize that under the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of those components that are going to go in those EV cars are actually being made in China?
Yeah.
I just find that funny that, people work in the car industry, but they're not reading the actual laws on where these products are coming from. So
Yeah.
they're actually killing themselves by supporting the Inflation Reduction Act or supporting Bidenomics.
Yeah, but I mean, even without that consideration, just the fact that electric vehicles are more expensive, at least now, to produce, to buy. And so is there really, and since there'd be so much increasingly dependent on electricity, which is going to be generated by coal-fired plants, unless we revive nuclear energy, which doesn't seem much on the horizon. So again, overall, we're still using fossil fuels to produce all that electricity. So is there a net gain with this in terms of reducing energy?
There's not, and actually, EV cars are actually more harmful to the environment than actually fossil fuels. To give you an example, they use the lithium batteries, right? Well, a lot of people don't realize this is when you go out and you actually mine lithium, what you basically do is you go out, you basically take a bulldozer, you bulldoze off the top layer of the ground, and then you pour this chemical on it, and the chemical basically causes the lithium to basically dissolve and recrystallize on the ground. And then you go out there and you scoop the ground up, and then you basically separate the lithium from the dirt.
Hmm.
The problem with that is once you put that lithium brine on the ground, that ground cannot be used again for like 20 or 30 years. You can't grow crops on or anything. The ground is now toxic. So again, how is that helpful to the economy when you got all this um, lithium brine out there? Not to mention you got to have more copper, so there's more copper mining going on. So you're putting more pollutants into the economy to mine all these additional minerals. I just don't see how the EV car really sells the point of being friendly to the environment.
There was a report recently in some of the media that the reason why Biden was in oil in China is because it involved a company that somehow he or his friends or whoever was attached to. In other words, there was a hidden profit motive there uh, on this side of the ocean by selling oil to China.
Um, I don't know. I don't know if the with that story, I try to play it like I see it. I don't think there was actually anything wrong or anything done intentional on that. I think where the confusion got in that is the oil companies in the United States were actually selling oil to China, and they actually kind of threw it back around onto Biden. I don't think Biden had anything to do with that. He's not smart enough to do something like that anyway.
Well, why would American companies be selling oil to China?
Uh, U.S. oil companies are in the business of making money. So if a Chinese oil company needs extra oil, they're more than willing to sell it to them for an extra dollar or $2 higher than what they can sell it here in the United States.
And that would actually be a factor in increasing the prices here domestically because the supply is being thinned out, correct?
That is correct. Yep. And supplies are already under a lot of pressure now with Joe Biden just simply not allowing these companies to drill on U.S. lands.
Yeah. Well, it's should there, some people would say there should be a law or regulation about selling oil to China. It should be prohibited. Do you think, is that a practical way of dealing with this?
Mm, I don't know if you want to put a law on it that you can't sell oil to a certain country. I think the problem really comes back is you need to drill oil here. If you were to drill oil here, you could get oil prices down dramatically. I mean, look under Donald Trump. How cheap was oil under Donald Trump? Now look how high it's gone up.
Yeah. So, but again, I mean, in terms of not messing with the economy, interfering with the economy, conservatives would argue that, you don't want to prevent international trade, so therefore we shouldn't stop selling oil to China. But I mean, we put restrictions on imports and exports and all that, so why not on oil?
Well, the United States has a lot of oil, so technically the United States has more oil in it than the Middle East. It's just a lot cheaper to drill it in the Middle East because it's so closer to the surface versus here in the United States, you've got to drill a lot deeper. It's a lot harder to drill it. So, and plus, I've also been told, um, why would the United States want to use up on its own resources when they use up their enemies and drive them out of business first?
Well, okay, but wrapping it up now, Mark. By election day, November 2024, next year, you don't see any possibility, or maybe just a very slim possibility, that the economy will improve enough for it to be politically useful, a winner for Joe Biden.
No, I do not, unless the Fed starts cutting interest rates a lot and doing it very quickly. I think the economy is just going to get worse and worse and worse between now and the election.
Okay, you have the last word, and you usually have an admonition about when things look bad. Just wait.
Oh, it's oh, Larry, it's always the darkest before things get really freaking bad.
As a hopeful sign for all our listeners out there.
Yeah,
Mark Collingsworth, the CIO of Very Global Wealth Management. Thanks once again for the economic update.
thank you.